welcome. Yesterday we studied till verse number 9, and today we are supposed to hear from different groups about their discussions and study of Shlok 10 to 16. So let us start with group number 1. Pratima Mataji, are you ready? Please
Yes,
unmute.
Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
So you can guide us, enlighten us on the verse number 10.
Yes, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. I'm presenting chapter 5, text 10 with the help and input of all my team members. Brahmani adhaya karmani sangam tyaktava karoti yaha lipyatena sapapena padma patram ivam bhasam. In the translation, it is mentioned that one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the result unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as a lotus leaf is untouched by water. That is, when duties are performed without attachment and the result are offered to the Lord, does not have any sinful reaction. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining that Brahmani means to perform activities in Krishna consciousness. The material world is a sum, total manifestation of the three modes of material nature, technically called pradhana. The Vedic isms from Mandukya Upanishad 2 and Mundaka Upanishad 1.2.10 and from Bhagavad Gita 14.3 are all indicating that everything in the material world is a manifestation of Brahman, and that Brahman is impregnated by Lord Krishna himself, making possible the birth of all living beings. The concept of understanding that everything belongs to Krishna is indeed real renunciation and perfect form of Krishna consciousness. In Mantra 1, in Upanishad, it is mentioned, Isa Vayam Idam Sarvam, which means everything, animate or inanimate, that is within the universe, is controlled and owned by the Lord. Therefore, when one perfectly knows that Lord Krishna is the proprietor of everything, he engages everything in the service of the Lord, without worrying about the result of his activities, whether it is virtuous or sinful. When one engages his senses in the service of the Lord, he remains uncontaminated by sinful reactions, exactly as the lotus leaf, though remaining in the water, is not wet. The Lord also says in the Gita, chapter 3, verses 30, Mahi sarvani karmani sanyasya, resign all works unto me, means offering the result of all activities to the Supreme Lord. In the same purport of chapter 3, text 30, there is an analogy where it is saying that the cashier may count millions of dollars for his employer, but he does not claim a cent for himself. Similarly, one has to realize that nothing in the world belongs to any individual person, but that everything belongs to the Supreme Lord. Moreover, when one acts in Krishna consciousness, he does not claim proprietorship over anything. This consciousness is called nirmama, when nothing is mine. There are many examples in Bhagavad Gita where Lord Krishna claims to the proprietor of the entire universe. I will mention two of them. Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, text 29. In this verse, the Supreme Lord is saying, Sarva Loka Maheshwara.
Yet to be studied, 5.29.
Okay. Which means he is the Supreme Lord, the Master, the proprietor of all planets and demigods. Secondly, in Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, text 8, Lord Krishna says, Aham sarvasya prabhavo mataha sarvam pravartate iti matva bhajanti mam buddha bhava samanvitaha. He is the source of all spiritual and material worlds. Everything emanates from him. The wise who perfectly know this engage in this devotional service and worship him with all their heart. Now, the conclusion of Srila Prabhupada is that a person without Krishna consciousness acts according to the concept of the material body and senses, but a person in Krishna consciousness acts according to the knowledge that is, a body is a property of Krishna and should therefore be engaged in the service of Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Mataji, for a systematic presentation on this verse. and you covered almost all the points. Krishna is teaching here with an example. He is giving example of lotus flower. That how a lotus flower is in the middle of water, but it never touches the surface of the water. This example of lotus is very important because if you consider, actually lotus is not any ordinary flower. It is the first created thing by the Supreme Lord Himself. You remember how Brahma appears in this world? A lotus sprouts out of the navel of Lord Vishnu. And then on that lotus, Brahma, appears. So actually, lotus is even senior to Lord Brahma in that sense. So Lord Himself created lotus. So this lotus signifies that a devotee, because Krishna is comparing devotee to a lotus, a devotee is not element of this material world because he is not attached to the product of material world. What is the binding factor? The binding factor in the material world is three words. That I am doing it. If one gives up this false identification that I am doing the activities of this world, this is called ahankar. And if one gives up this ahankar, then automatically he is not attached, he is not touching the contamination of this material world. How can one understand this? How can one remain untainted and untouched even while living in this world? There is a famous story from Puranas. There was a king who was very, very saintly. He was a karma yogi. He was handling the kingdom on behalf of the Supreme Lord. So one day a friend visited him, and out of curiosity, this friend asked the king that how he was called a karma yogi. You are always in the midst of all temptations and worldly pleasures. How can we understand that you are a karma yogi? The king replied that, okay, I will tell you. This is my secret. I will tell you. In the meanwhile, can you do one job for me? Okay, I can do that. What needs to be done? So the king tells, you go around my palace with this lamp in your hand and make sure that not a single drop of ghee should fall from this lamp. And this flame, this wick lamp is there in the hand. Be careful that this flame should not put off. The flame should not be put off by air, the wind, or any obstacle. So, two conditions. You have to take the lamp in your hand in the whole palace, but you should not spill even a drop of ghee on the floor. And you should make sure that the lamp is lighting, the flame should not be put off. So, this person went with this lamp very carefully in whole palace. And when he came back, the king was very happy. He said, you did a good job. The lamp is there, you didn't drop a single drop of ghee and it's still lighting. How was the palace? He said, I didn't see your palace. I was so thoughtful about saving the lamp. So my whole attention was absorbed in the lamp, although I was walking around in the palace, but my whole attention was to save the flame of the lamp. King said, exactly, this is my secret. Because my whole attention is in serving the Supreme Lord, although I am walking, I am doing my activities, I am into the material world externally, but actually I am not affected by it. I am oblivious of my surroundings. So this is the secret of a karma yogi. He doesn't get entangled in the affairs of this world, just like a lotus flower. Although he is in the water, but he is untouched by the water. So this example is very appropriate. You can mark this verse. If you cannot remember the whole verse, at least remember the fourth line of this verse. Padma Patram Ivambhasa. So you can quote this, Prabhupada's, Krishna's example of lotus flower. Padma means lotus. Patram means lotus leaves. Okay, so team two, who is the speaker? Let me see. Yeah, Sachi Maharani Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Pranam.
Yes, Mataji.
5.11. Um, Yesterday we discussed that Srila Prabhupada in this verse is speaking about the qualities of devotees and how do they develop them. In comparison to the practitioners who follow dry methods of self-realization, the devotees rather taking unnecessary hardships can purify themselves just by taking shelter of Krishna conscious methods, which directly means that devotee needs to satisfy the senses of Krishna and is not limited by any way. Krishna can be satisfied by mind or body or action. These activities of Srila Prabhupada mentions are called sadachar. A person who performs this is called as liberated, even though he might appear to be working materially. He is always in Krishna consciousness. That way, the practitioner can easily realize that he is not this body or even experience ecstasy beyond the limitations of body. While following the process, Srila Prabhupada writes that the practitioner gets rid of false ego, like we see in case of Dhruv Maharaj, that when he engaged himself in performing austerities for Krishna while chanting the holy name, he get rid of his material desire and egoistic competition for a bigger empire, rather asked for being always menial to devotees. Similarly, we see in the case of soldiers of Srila Prabhupada that by chanting the holy names and getting engaged in the activities to please Srila Prabhupada and Krishna, all of them became the best of devotees. The dry speculators, after having reached a certain stage of austerities, return back to this materialistic society in the name of philanthropy and get entangled back. But a Krishna devotee having his engagement all life long in service of Krishna, although acting in the materialistic world, remains always transcendental.
Yeah,
That is
thank you very much, Mataji. This verse is actually an extension of the same theme where Krishna is telling how a person who is detached, why he still works. What is the reason that he still works? So, Krishna is explaining that a karma yogi works for his own liberation, for his own purification. He acts through his body, mind, intelligence, and senses just for his liberation, his purification. And when one gets purified, Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Ruchyate. When one engages one's senses in the service of the master of the senses. And that term is called Sadachar. See, there are two kind of people, there are two kind of entities actually. One is Char and one is Achar. Char means moving entities like animals, birds, human beings. Achar means non-moving entities like trees, mountains, like that. Non-moving entities can't behave, can't act. They are restricted, like stones. They can't act. Trees, they can't act. They may display some um, ecstasy in form of, showering flowers and things, but that also is restricted in the material world. In spiritual world, trees, when they become jubilant, they shower flowers, fruits, and things. But in material world, that also is controlled by the nature. But char means moving entities. These moving entities are free to behave, are free to act in their own way. And their behavior or their action is called acharan or achar. In short, achar, or in the proper term, it is called acharan. Now, this achar or this acharan can be of two types. One is durachar, or sadachar. Dur means bad, sad means good. So durachar means bad behavior and sadachar means good behavior. So there is possibility that a living entity behaves in a bad way or a good way. Now, when living entity acts in a good way, that is called sadachar, and the best way is to serve for Krishna's satisfaction. So a karma yogi, he engages himself in the activities of body, mind, intelligence, senses just for the service of Krishna. Therefore, his activities becomes the cause of his purification, and he has no material reaction. Prabhupada is quoting the verse, Iha jashir harir dase karmana manasagira nikhalasu api avasthasu jivan muktasu uchyate. Such a person who is just serving with his karmana, mana, by his mind, senses, everything, just for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, he is liberated even while living in this body. He need not to leave his body to be liberated. Even while living in this body, he is liberated. Now the question may be asked that how is it determined that by the same action some people are bound and some people are liberated? So in summary, now Krishna is telling the 12th verse. So let us hear from the next team. Jagatambika Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Yes.
So Bhagavad Gita 5.12. Srila Prabhupada is talking in his purport about the differences between ayukta and ayukta. A karmi yogi or yuktaha is engaged in devotional service to Lord in a fixed way. He has no anxieties because he is attached to Krishna and works for Krishna. So he is liberated. He is not attached to the results of his activities and offers all to Krishna. He is karma phalam tyaktva. He attains shantim, peacefulness, because he has unflinching faith on Krishna. Yuktaha is fully dependent on the Lord for everything. He has no anxieties. Example, a child is not worried about maintaining the house. He is not worried about if something runs out in the kitchen or the bills are piling up or his bank balance is becoming low. It is the parents who takes care of all that. So the child is completely dependent with all his faith on his parents to take care of him and his needs. So a devotee is peaceful and satisfied just by surrendering to Krishna. Such person does not function on the basis of duality. His activities and focus are Krishna conscious. He only sees Krishna and Krishna's energies everywhere and in everything. His vision is not blurred with Maya, unlike the ayukta person. Example, a child playing in the presence of his mother is happy and worryless. If somebody comes and stand in front of his mother, he cannot see her. The child cannot see her. So he becomes restless, anxious, and fearful. And this is the situation of ayuktaha, a person not engaged in Krishna conscious, who is not connected with Krishna. Whereas a Krishna conscious person is purified and at peace and is fearless. Example, Srila Prabhupada went to preach in an unknown country but was fearless and depended completely on Krishna, and he was just doing his duty to preach, all depending on Krishna completely. And another final example is Prahlad Maharaj, who had unflinching faith in Krishna and his name, that he had no fear about any consequences of his father's actions on him. Krishna protected him. Thus, a yuktaha or karma yogi devotee realizes that there is nothing that exists except Krishna. So he becomes fearless. He is fearless about this material world and he is absorbed in the Lord. Yes. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, very nice. I personally appreciate this presentation very much because you have used many examples, and I especially like the example of the child, that how a child is anxiety free. You know, child never goes to parents and ask them that, you know, this month you did a very nice job. My dear father, you maintained me very nicely. My dear mother, you also did a nice job that you cooked for me every day. Will you do the same next month? Does child ask any time like this? He never asks. This child has full faith that his parents will maintain them. In the same way, devotee has no anxiety because a devotee is completely dependent upon the Supreme Lord. Some people may have some kind of peace in this world. They may have peace in temporary pleasures of this world for some time. But that peace is also adulterated, mixed with lot of things, like they have lamentation of the past, they have fear of the future, and they have illusion of the present. So that is not unadulterated. But a karma yogi has unadulterated peace because he is not doing anything for himself. He is simply doing for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. And as Mataji has very nicely brought up, the difference between a person in Krishna consciousness and a person in bodily consciousness, yukta and ayukta. So these are the differences where a devotee is on absolute platform. He has no anxiety, he has no fear. Like Srila Prabhupada, Prahlad Maharaj, all these examples are very, very appropriate. Whereas a person in a bodily consciousness is always in anxiety of this world. Sometimes he'll be happy, sometimes he'll be sad, and in aggregate, he will be always miserable in the material world. Let us read this quotation of Srila Prabhupada. Okay. Radha Vallava Mataji, would you like to read?
A Krishna conscious person never thinks that I am doing something. Even if you ask him that, are you going are you going to such and such place? He will say that I do not know when I shall go. But when Krishna will ask me or allow me to go, I shall go.
Please continue. You can complete the quote.
Prabhuji, I completed. Okay,
No,
I'll repeat.
I changed it. The next slide.
Okay, sorry. I'm saying this from my practical experience from my Guru Maharaj. He would never say, I'm going, I'm doing. No, if Krishna desires, then I shall do it. If Krishna desires, then I shall go.
So this is the spirit of a devotee. The devotee never thinks that he is the doer. He always have this feeling that Krishna is actually making him doing that. Of course, he doesn't blame Krishna for his sinful activities. This is applicable for a perfect karma yogi who is practicing Krishna consciousness according to the spiritual master, according to the scriptures, and such a person is completely dependent on the will of the Supreme Lord. Now, it is sometimes difficult to understand that actually then who is the doer? A Krishna conscious person, a karma yogi, he doesn't think that he is doing anything. Then who is actually doing things? If Krishna is directly doing things, then is he responsible for the activities of this world? If soul is doing it, then does soul has that independence of doing things on its own? If both are not doing it, then who is doing actually? Who is the actual doer of activities in this world. That is the next part of this chapter. So let us hear from next team. Team 4, Chetan Prabhu.
Yes, Hare Krishna Prabhu. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. So, verse 13 and 14, the main focus here is how the embodied soul, which resides in the material body, can go beyond the material body. In fact, the living body, it is said in this in the 13th verse that it resides in the city of the 9 gates, Navadware Pure, which is the body. The 9 gates are the 2 eyes, the 2 nostrils, the 2 ears, the mouth, the anus, and the genitals. But who actually is doing the activities? It is the activities of the body are conducted by the particular modes of nature. And Prabhupada says in the purport that it is automatically conducted by the modes of nature. But what happens is that owing to forgetfulness of its superior nature, the soul identifies itself with the material body, and as a consequence, it suffers. So what is the way to purify the soul from this condition? Srila Prabhupada says in the purport that it is by Krishna consciousness that the soul can revive his real position and thus come out of this embodiment. Meaning, even if the soul is subject to the conditions of the body, it can go beyond those conditions. And this is possible, as it is said in the verse itself, by control of nature and renouncing all actions. Now, it's said here that renouncing, how to renounce? It's sarva karmani manasa sannyasyaste, meaning to renounce all actions mentally. So what we understand here is that the renunciation should not be only external, it should be internal also. Meaning, it's not that we just stop doing a certain action, we renounce, and then in the mind we're still brooding over that. So it should be on the mental level also. And it is by so doing that even if the soul resides in the body, the soul will reside happily. Now, when we're speaking of renouncing all activities, it does not mean that we should stop doing action, we should stop doing activities. Prabhupada says in the purport that when one takes to Krishna consciousness, at once one becomes completely aloof from bodily activities. So the activities are there, but the person becomes aloof to those activities. So what we understand is that by engaging in devotional service, by practicing Krishna consciousness, we can have control and we can go beyond the activities of the body. And Srila Prabhupada quotes the Shvetashvatar Upanishad, which says that the living entity in his conditioned stage identifies himself with the body, but when he identifies himself with the Lord within, who is the master, who is the controller, he becomes just as free as the Lord, even if he's still in the body. So a Krishna conscious person is free from both the outer and inner activities of the material body. So the point here is that one should, by the practice of Krishna consciousness, become aloof from the activities of the body, and thus he frees himself from the reactions also of those activities. And in the purport of verse 14, Srila Prabhupada says that the living entity is one of the energies of the Supreme, like the nature, and it is completely distinct from matter, which is also another nature of the Supreme, but matter is considered as inferior. Now, this body is temporary, and it has been obtained as a result of activities and their reactions. Living in such conditional atmosphere, one suffers the result of the soul identifying itself with the body. It is ignorance acquired from time immemorial that is the cause of bodily sufferings and distress. As long as the living entity is in this city of the body, he appears to be the master, but the real master, the supreme controller, is in fact the Lord within. So the living entity is neither the proprietor nor controller of its actions and reactions. And Srila Prabhupada gives an analogy in the end of the verse 14 that it is simply in the midst of material ocean and is struggling for existence. The water is tossing him, he has no control. And the best solution, the only solution of getting out of the water is by taking the boat of Krishna consciousness. And this alone can save the living entity from the consequences and reactions of material actions. So thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you very much, Chetan Prabhu, for summarizing the whole thing. So what we learn from this is actually the soul is not the doer. Material nature is the doer of the actions. But why soul suffers? Because soul misidentifies. Soul forgets that soul belongs to the spiritual nature. And soul starts to misidentify with the body. We'll study this in detail, but just telling in a nutshell. Soul starts to misidentify with the body. Now, whatever happens to the body with the influence of material nature, soul relates that with itself. And that is the cause of the pain. Let us see a small video. This video is a little funny, but this is our situation in the material world. Can you see this?
Yes.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, we can see.
Yeah. Did you understand what happened? Who will summarize for everybody? Anyone? Somebody would like to tell what happened exactly? Yes, Swara Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam.
Prabhuji, can I?
Okay. Okay, Swara Prabhu, let Radha Valla Mataji speak. Huh?
Yeah.
Prabhuji, the soul, like we think that we are doing everything, but actually we are not doing.
Yes. What happened in the video? What that person was doing?
He is pretending that he is doing everything. Like he stopped
Yeah.
the train and then he's again, he just, he left. I mean, usne bhej diya. He thought that he sent the
Yeah.
train.
You see, the person was, he put some powder in his hands and then he was ready. As soon as the train came, he was holding the train and he was thinking that he stopped it. Then people started coming out, and after that, he was pushing the train and he was thinking that he sent the train out. And he was saying, yes, I have done something. This is Prakriti Kremanani, Gunai Karmani Sarvasha, Ahankar Vibhudatma Karta Hamiti Mannati. This is Ahankar. This is misidentification. That soul starts to think that soul is identifying with the body. Now, whatever is happening with the arrangement of the material nature, soul starts to think that actually he is responsible. And therefore, whatever suffering comes to the body, soul also partakes in that suffering. But in Krishna consciousness, what happens? We understand our real position that no, I am spirit soul. I do not belong to this material nature. Actually, I belong to the spiritual world. So if I belong to the spiritual world, I have nothing to do with this body. So he is aloof from the bodily activities, internally and externally, as Chetan Prabhu brought out. And therefore, he is completely happy. So that is the main reason of suffering of the individual soul. We will study more in detail. Let us hear from next group also. Then we'll study. So next, who is there? Let me see. Braj Sevika Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yes.
So we're going to explain chapter 5, text 15. So this verse further explains who is responsible for all the good and bad things happening. Is the Lord responsible for it or not? And the translation to this verse is that the Supreme Lord does not assume anyone's sinful activities nor their pious activities, but the embodied beings are bewildered by this truth due to ignorance covering their knowledge. So to further develop this, in this purport, Srila Prabhupada, he compares the Supreme Lord and the living entity. He explains that the Supreme Lord is Vibhu, omniscient. That means he is full of all 6 opulences, that is, unlimited knowledge, riches, strength, fame, beauty, and renunciation. He is always satisfied in himself, undisturbed by sinful or pious activities. And the Lord, he does not create a particular situation for any living entity. On the other hand, the living entity is termed as anu, atomic, and the living entity, he is prone to ignorance because of limited power, although he is full of knowledge and bliss. And the living entity, he has a free will to desire because he is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. So he has the capacity to desire by his free will. And that desire is a subtle form of conditioning for the living entity. So when the living entity desires something, the Lord sitting in our heart, the Paramatma or the Super Soul, understands what is in our heart and allows us to fulfill those desires. And the desires of the living entities are fulfilled only by the omnipotent Lord. This is further described by the analogy of flower. The Lord is the constant companion of the living entity as Super Soul, and he can understand the desires of the individual soul, just like one can smell the fragrance of a flower by being near to it. So, the Lord fulfills the desires as one deserves. Man proposes and God disposes. Actually, unless Lord sanctions, nothing will happen, but it is we who desire. So after we desire, the Lord engages accordingly. The Lord, he only facilitates our desires. However, there can be a misuse of desire, and it is mentioned in that verse, Agnanevratam Jnanam, which means we are covered by ignorance. And this makes us behave in a particular way. When we identify with this behavior, we are bewildered and we think that as the essence and let our desire caught completely in what we are seeking according to our bodily nature. Then we become entangled. And when we become entangled, the chain of actions and reactions begin. And under this ignorance, the living entity claims that the Lord is responsible for his conditional existence. However, the Lord is not responsible for all good and bad reactions. It is also further explained that the Lord is neutral to everyone, and this is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutras. The Lord does not interfere with the desires of the minute, independent living entities. In fact, when the living entity is bewildered, the Lord allows him to fulfill those desires, but the Lord is never responsible for the particular situation created. On the other hand, when the living entity, he desires Krishna, the Lord takes special care and encourages him to desire in such a way that he can attain him and be eternally happy. So to conclude, how do we become gradually purified? So Jivera Swarupahaya Krishnera Nityadas. It is from Chaitanya Charitamrit, Madhya Lila 20.108. It is the living entity's constitutional position to be an eternal servant of Krishna. So we should realize that we are part and parcel of Krishna. And if we desire for bhakti, devotional services, and we desire to engage our senses in the service of the Lord, then Krishna will fulfill our desire and elevate us to the higher platform. In the same vein, if we quote from Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 verse 5, Antakale chamam eva, so whoever at the end of his life quits his body remembering me alone at once, attains my nature, of this there is no doubt. So thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much, Mataji. And you have very nicely explained how Jiva desires to enjoy in this material world, and Lord facilitates being neutral to all living entities. Lord has no partial behavior towards certain living entities. He is very neutral, and through the medium of material nature, through the medium of three modes of material nature, the Lord provides a particular nature to the living entity. And that is called Swabhav. Swabhav means a particular nature which living entity acquires as per his inclination. And that can be compared to any attachment. Like consider you have a nice sweater or coat. Now, how you get a cloth? You go to a shop, you see many options, and then you select one particular cloth. So that is desiring for it. And then you select it, you pay for it, you purchase it, then you bring it to your home, you use it for so long, then you wash it periodically, you iron it. This whole process creates attachment to that coat. Now imagine somebody just snatches off your coat in front of you and lets fire to it. How you'll feel? Will you not feel hurt? No, I selected it personally. I like this coat so much. I used it so many times. I personally washed and ironed it. How you can burn this coat? Nothing happening to us, but that attachment has developed with the coat. In the same way, this is Swabhav. Swabhav is like a coat. So we have acquired this Swabhav by our own inclinations, by our own choice. And material nature cater to that free will of the living entity on the sanction of the Supreme Lord. So now the question is, okay, living entity is not doing the activity directly. Living entity is misidentifying and then desiring. Supreme Lord is not doing anything directly. Supreme Lord is arranging through material nature, but material nature itself is not functional by its own. So Jiva's desire has to come and Lord's sanction has to come. Then only material nature will provide a certain situation. So then, is Supreme Lord directly involved or not? Is Supreme Personality of Godhead is responsible or not? If not, then who is the real culprit? What is the real cause of bondage of living entity? That is the question. So let us hear from the last team, the speaker, Sri Radha Kripa Kataksha Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So in chapter 5, verse 16, the analogy used is in the translation itself. One is enlightened with knowledge by which nations is destroyed.
Your connection is poor, Mataji. Maybe you can stop video and then speak.
So this knowledge is okay. So I start again. In chapter 5, verse 16, the analogy is used with translation itself. One is enlightened with the knowledge by which nations is destroyed. Then his knowledge reveals everything, as the sunlight lights up everything in the daytime. So this knowledge is given by someone who has already perfected the knowledge and who is fully pure. So this shows that this process is bona fide and is gradual. So one becomes purified by performing the Vedic yagas, which is accepting and serving the bona fide spiritual master, and like in Bhagavad Gita 4:34, Tadvidi Pradipatena. Just try to understand the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. So this perfection in knowledge is surrendering to Krishna and attaining Krishna consciousness with practice. Then everything is revealed. So in ignorance, there is bewilderment, there's darkness, there's confusion of our relationship with Krishna, which is shown by the spiritual master. And in the purport of chapter 2, verse 12, Srila Prabhupada quotes Katha Upanishad, Nityo Nityam Chetanas Chetanam. The Lord says clearly that he himself, Arjuna, and all the kings who are assembled on the battlefield are eternally individual beings. And at the end of this purport of chapter 5, verse 16, it's written, individuality, personal identity is the real knowledge.
Yes. So if we summarize, thank you so much, Mataji. If we summarize, the real cause of living entities' conditional existence is ignorance, avidya. Avidya means misidentification of the living entity towards the material nature. This avidya is actually the root cause. And because living entity misidentifies with the body, then living entity starts to relate with the temporary happiness and distress of the body. And according to the desires of the living entity in that state, the Supreme Lord facilitates the desire through material nature. So actually, Lord is not responsible for his actions and reactions. Living entity directly does not do. But if we summarize the whole thing, that agyana, ignorance, avidya, is the root cause of living entities' bondage. So then what needs to be done? If we are bound because of avidya, then what needs to be done is the next subject matter. Before that, let us read a quotation of Srila Prabhupada. So Devi Mataji, can you read?
Yes, Prabhuji. Just like a thief, he is praying, God, my Lord, my dear Lord, give some opportunity. I can steal that thing. Krishna first of all says, no, don't do it. But he insists. Then Krishna says, all right, do it. But as soon as you do it, you become entangled. Why you are doing against the will of Krishna? That is your entanglement. Krishna is giving you facility to steal others' property, but you become entangled. That is not Krishna's responsibility, your responsibility.
So Krishna has told living entity through scriptures, through devotees, even as Paramatma, there is always intuition. The Lord tells what is right and wrong. If you do something wrong, you feel guilty about it. That is Paramatma's voice. So Lord is always guiding the living entity, but living entity is so determined to do sinful activities, the Lord has to provide it because he has to maintain the standard of free will of the living entity. So when Lord provides these situations, then if we perform any sinful activity, we'll become entangled. How Lord is responsible for it? It is all our own misuse of the free will. Vaijanti Radha Mataji, can you read? Vaijanti Radhika Mataji.
Yes, Prabhuji. He can give you permission, but the enjoyment and suffering will have to be taken by you. You insist permission, I want to do this, and without permission, you can't do it. Therefore, Krishna gives you permission. All right, you do it, but at your risk. Krishna does not want that you should do it, but you want to do it, therefore, he gives permission.
We can understand this with a simple example that suppose a mother has a small child and the child is having cold and cough. The child is adamant to take ice cream, to eat ice cream. Mother and father will tell, no, don't eat ice cream. Your cold and cough will go worse. But the child is not ready to listen. The child is rolling on the ground, very adamant to eat ice cream. What mother will do? Okay, take little. But by eating that ice cream, will mother get cold? No. Child has eaten ice cream, child will get cold. Child has to suffer. In the same way, the adamant living entity desires something, Supreme Personality of Godhead fulfills it, just like a mother fulfills the adamant desire of a small child. But that doesn't mean Supreme Personality of God is responsible for it. Therefore, if we really want to come out of our bondage, we have to get proper knowledge. That is called Vidya. Because if avidya is the root cause of our bondage, then Vidya, knowledge, is actually the cause for our liberation. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that we have to associate with saintly persons. If we associate with saintly persons, that automatically we get Divya Gyan, as we studied in the previous chapter also. As soon as we get Divya Gyan, just like when sun arises, it automatically dissipates all darkness. So when Divya Gyan comes, the transcendental knowledge comes to the living entity, then automatically all ignorance is dissipated. And then living entity realizes that no, I should not be worried about this body and senses and material nature, but I should be worried about Param, about the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. And that's how knowledge enlightens the living entity. Srila Prabhupada tells many important points in this purport. He tells that living entity's main reason for bewilderment is misidentification. Now, living entity may identify with the body, living entity may identify with the nature, living entity may identify that I am God. That is the last snare of Maya. Some living entities may think that they are God. Now, if they are God, how they are covered by nations? How they are covered by illusion? That they cannot answer. So when such bewildered living entity comes across a bona fide spiritual master, then only he can come out of his ignorance, and then only he can get the pure vidya, pure transcendental knowledge, and that is the cause of his liberation. Let us read further, where Krishna is telling how by this knowledge one gets to focus on the Supreme Lord. Shrutidhar Prabhu, can you read translation for 17th verse?
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully cleansed of misgivings through complete knowledge, and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation.
So how exactly a karma yogi in a perfect knowledge he becomes liberated is described in this verse. First is tad buddhaya. Buddhi means intelligence. So that living entity fixes his intelligence on the Supreme Lord. Tad atmana. Here atmana means mind. He always meditate on the Supreme Lord with his mind. Tan nishtha, not periodically, with full faith and determination, he fixed in his devotional service. And tat parayana, fully surrendered to the Supreme Lord. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur tells tat parayana means engaged in hearing and chanting about the Supreme Lord. When one engages in hearing and chanting of the Supreme Lord, then ganchanti apun avrittim jnana niridhuta kalmasha. Then person becomes completely cleansed of all misgivings. Cheto darpana marjanam, which recite in Shikshashtakam, by chanting of the holy name. And also in Bhagavatam we read Vidinoti that hearing Krishna Katha cleanses the heart. So by hearing and chanting, by Tat Parayana, by surrendering on the Supreme Lord, the heart is cleansed and then person proceeds towards the path of liberation. So therefore, one has to focus on the Supreme Personality of Godhead if he wants to be completely free from the material nature. Now another question may be asked, okay, a person who is fixed on the Supreme Lord, does he neglect other people? Does he misbehaves with other people? How he exactly behaves with others, other living entities? That is described in Shloka number 18. So, Deva Dev Prabhu, can you read 18th verse and translation both?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Vidya
Yes.
Vinaya Sampane Brahmane Gavihastini Suniche Vasapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and a gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater.
So, this verse is also a very important verse of Bhagavad Gita. You can mark this verse. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Suni Chaiva Swapakecha Pandita Samadarshina. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne, one who is in a perfect knowledge, by the virtue of his knowledge, Brahmane Gavihastini. He sees all living entities with Samadarshina, with equal vision. There are some examples given. Brahmani Gavi Hastini. Brahmanas and cows are in the mode of goodness. So he sees people in mode of goodness with utmost respect. Then Hastini elephant. Elephant is known for its power. So elephant is in mode of passion. And then Suni Chaiva Swapakecha. Suni Chaiva means dog. Swapakecha means dog eater. That means a chandal. So they are in mode of ignorance. So person in mode of goodness like brahmanas and cows, entities in the mode of passion like elephant, and then entities in the mode of ignorance like dogs and dogs eater. All he sees with equal vision because he's above the three modes. He is not contaminated with the three modes. Not only that, his virtue of his knowledge enables him to see all situations also similar. If he gets pain, he is seeing the hand of God. If he experiences pleasure, he sees the hand of Supreme Lord. And therefore, such a person can be termed as person in the full knowledge. Now, somebody may ask that what are the characteristics of such person? We want to know it in more detail. So the Supreme Lord is telling the characteristics of such person who is on the platform of knowledge. That platform is called Brahma platform. Brahma janati iti Brahmana. That Brahma means knowledge. So one who is in the platform of knowledge, what are his symptoms? What are his characteristics? That is described by Supreme Lord in the next 3 verses. So Anupama Mataji, can you read translation of 19th verse?
Yes, Prabhuji. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the condition of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman, and thus they are already situated in Brahman.
So this person in full knowledge, they are actually above the conditions of birth and death. We already discussed this because their whole focus is on the Supreme Lord. They're not into attachments or repulsion of this material world. They don't have any desire or hatred for the material world. They are having equanimity of mind. Sign of self-realization is person has equipoised vision. That is a sign of self-realization. So person is not identifying with any particular caste or particular situation or particular living entity. No. Living entity feels that all are spirit souls, and I am here on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Whatever he wants me to do, I'll do that. Characteristic of such a person are given as follows. Keshava Priya Mataji, can you read translation for 20 and 21st verse?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Text 20. A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant, nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who is self-intelligent, who is unbewildered, and who knows the signs of God, is already situated in transcendence. In text 21, such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure, but is always in trance, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme.
Problem starts in material world when we become too happy in our petty pleasures. Then we become too attached to the material world. And you see, the more we become happy in the pleasures of the material world, that to that degree we become distressful when we get pains of this material world. So first thing to tolerate in this material world is not pain. First thing to tolerate in this material world is pleasures. Therefore, Krishna is telling first symptom of self-realized person, he doesn't rejoice in something pleasant. He doesn't get carried away by petty pleasures of this material world. And such a person who cannot, he is not carried away by these pleasures of material world, that person is also unaffected when something unpleasant comes in his life. Therefore, one has to learn to tolerate happiness, because in happiness we become proud, we forget Krishna, and we misbehave with others also. So one who can tolerate pleasure can also tolerate miseries. And such a person is in fixed intelligence, sthira buddhi. Fixed intelligence means his intelligence is fixed on the service of the Supreme Lord. And because his intelligence is fixed on that, therefore asammudho, he is unbewildered. Remember the story we discussed about the king's friend who was carrying the lamp? So because he's fixed on the Supreme Lord, he's unbewildered. The tribulations, the troubles of this material world doesn't affect him. Such a person is Brahmavid. Actually, he knows the signs of God. He is situated in the transcendence. He is unattracted by material pleasure, and he enjoys the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. It's not a suppressive artificial renunciation. Because the devotee experiences the unlimited bliss of the Supreme Lord, he automatically gets unattracted to the material pleasures. So that is the symptom of a self-realized soul. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baldev Vidyabhushan has given a small chart for this, a small chart of series for this. Like first one is Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He explains this verse by telling that soul who is surrendered to the Supreme Lord, he experiences happiness within. He experiences bliss within. And because he experiences bliss within, therefore his mind doesn't go outside to search happiness. His mind doesn't go outside for sense gratification. And therefore such a person constantly relish that sweetness of his relationship with the Supreme Lord. He doesn't go for lower pleasures of this material world. Such a person can attain permanent happiness. That means the spiritual world. Baldev Vidyabhushan tells little different but in the same note. He tells first what happens to a person in knowledge. He becomes unattached to sense gratification. Like you imagine, it's a very hot day. Imagine, it's summer. It's very hot day. And you went to see your friend. Your friend is a teacher, a science teacher in a school. So you went to see him. As you entered his office, you see a nice glass of, looking like lime water. And there is a lemon next to it, which is squeezed. And there is one straw cap next to it. And there is nice glass of looking like lemon water. You went there, you see, wow, I'm so thirsty. My friend is so nice. There is a straw. There is a squeezed lemon. This must be lemon water. And you picked it up and you're just about to drink it. In the meanwhile, your friend comes. He said, stop. Don't drink it. That is acid. That is HCl, hydrochloric acid. If you drink it, we will die immediately. Then what we will do? We'll immediately keep it down. This is knowledge. Your friend will ask, then what about this lemon and this straw? He said, no, I just finished my lunch. This lemon is from my lunch. Actually, this acid is kept for my science experiment. So if we get that knowledge, then we are not attached to that acid. Once you know that it is acid, will you still drink it? No. So when we get knowledge of the absolute, when we get knowledge of the material world, automatically we leave sense gratification. So Baldev Vidyabhushan tells person in knowledge, first of all, he becomes unattached to sense objects. Then what? If he is unattached to something, then he has to become attached to something higher. So then person becomes attached to his real nature, spiritual nature. And that state is called samadhi. When person re-establishes his lost relationship with the Supreme Lord. And in that samadhi, if person maintains his life, then at the end of life, he attains unlimited happiness. That is the spiritual world. Srila Prabhupada also describes in a similar note. Srila Prabhupada tells that a Krishna conscious person, a devotee, becomes so absorbed in the loving service of the Supreme Lord that he automatically loses all taste for the slower sense pleasures. He is giving an example of Yamunacharya. Yamunacharya is a very famous Acharya from South India. He tells that Yadavadhi mama cheta Krishna padara vindayor. Whenever I am in perfect Krishna consciousness, and that time if some thoughts of sense gratification comes in my mind, I spit at that thought. Because I'm so absorbed in Krishna consciousness that these lower pleasures do not attract me. So such a person engage in Krishna consciousness and he does not need lower sense gratification of this material world. such a person is liberated soul. So that way, these are some of the signs of a self-realized living entity. Actually, there is no pleasure in the material. We feel like pleasure, but there is no pleasure in the material. So Krishna is telling in the next in the next verse, what exactly happens when a living entity tries to enjoy these sense objects. Sachidananda Prabhu, would you like to read translation for 22nd verse?
Yes, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna. An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery, which are due to contact with the material senses. O son of Kunti, such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them.
Very important verse again. These are some very, very important words for our devotional service. यही संस्पर्श जाब होगा दुख योनया एवते. Sansparsh. Sparsh means to touch. Sansparsh means completely when one comes in contact of the senses, of the sense objects. Then what happens? Dukkha yonaya evate. Yona means womb. Now, if there's a womb of monkey, who will take birth? Monkey will take birth. If there is a womb of human being, the human being will take birth. If there is a womb of dukkha, miseries, who will take birth? Miseries will take birth. So when the senses come in contact with sense objects, what comes out is miseries. So if one knows this concept, such a wise person will never go for such cheap sense gratification. So therefore, a liberated soul is not at all interested in anything temporary. He looks towards the transcendental pleasure. Ramante yogino anante. They search for the ultimate pleasure that is in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Now a question may be asked that even if one knows that sense enjoyment brings distress according to this verse, still there are so many urges of senses. Even after practicing Krishna consciousness for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, still if our favorite food item comes in front of us, how we feel? For Matajis, if a clothes shop comes in front of you, how you feel? You don't feel agitation to purchase, to do shopping. So still so many urges of sense gratification come. How to deal with that? Krishna tells in next verse. Diya Mataji, can you read translation for 23rd verse?
Before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger, he is well situated and is happy in this world.
So, Krishna is telling that there will be urges of the senses. And if you go for satisfying the urges, it is like putting ghee in the fire. If you put more and more ghee in the fire will ablaze more heavily. So what you need to do, you need to tolerate. Prabhupada also gave a very nice example of itching. When you get itching, if you do itching at that, if you scratch at that place, itching increases. But if you tolerate for some time, the itching subsides. In the same way, there will be so many vegas, there will be so many urges, like their vacho vegam. There's urge to speak. We all have this experience. We all want to speak something. We don't know also something we want to speak. We have to control. Especially if we are not related to Krishna, we should control. Vacho vegam, manasa, the urges of mind. We'll study this in Nectar of Instruction. Manasa, krodha vegam, anger. Then genitals, belly. So many urges are there. So if we try to control them, it's difficult. So just postpone it, tolerate it. And if we tolerate such urges, then we can we can overcome the misery of the material world. How long we have to do this? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? No, Krishna is telling till the end of your life. Of your life, Sharira Vimokshanat. Till the time soul gives up the body, till the end of the life, we should learn to tolerate the urges of the body. If we tolerate this, then definitely we will be free and we'll go back to Krishna. Like one time, there was one saintly person, and he was a renunciate. So he had long beard and long hairs, and he was living like a poor person on the street. So one boy would always come and make fun of him. He would tell that your beard is real or it is beard of a goat. You understand? Goat also a beard. So this child would always make fun of the sadhu. Is your beard real or you have snatched it from a goat? So like that he would always tease. The sadhu would never reply to this boy. Many years passed by. This boy also became a grown-up man, and he was married and things. One day, some people came to this man and they told him that, that sadhu used to live on the street. He's calling you. Oh, why he's calling me? He's going to die. He wants to meet you before he dies. So this man rushes and he goes to this sadhu. And now this sadhu tells that, you would ask me this question every day, that this beard is real or this is beard of a goat. My beard is real. So this man was surprised. He said, why are you telling me now? You could have told me any day before. I would make fun of you every day. Why are you telling me now? The sadhu said, because I lived my life like a sadhu and now I'm going to die. Therefore, my beard is real beard of a sadhu. If I would have drifted before my death, it was never a real beard, it was beard of a goat. That means my renunciation was fake. If I would have drifted before my death. So until we die, we cannot give up this process. So we should pray to Krishna that Krishna, you brought me to this process of Krishna consciousness. Now let me live my whole life following this process. And if I leave my body in this state of mind, then as per Krishna's explanation here, we'll definitely get liberated. And such person is actually experiencing supreme happiness, ultimate happiness within. Text number 24. So, who will read? Usha Mataji, would you like to read? Text 24.
Yes, Prabhuji. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme.
So characteristics of a liberated person are, he enjoys happiness within, and that is a factual experience. Nobody has to give him a certificate that, you are a happy person. Nobody gives that certificate. If you are blissful within, you can feel it. Therefore, that person is not attached to any situation. He can sit anywhere and he will be happy. He can walk, he can be in any situation. Because internally, he has no longer any desire to enjoy in the material world. Therefore, such person is always happy. He does not look pleasure in outside world, in outside karmi, music, dance, entertainment. No. His whole nourishment is coming from within. The question may be asked, did you see such people, Krishna? Did you see somebody like that? Krishna said, yes, I have seen many people like that, who are free from all sins, who are free from dualities and doubts. Their mind are engaged within, and they're working for everyone's welfare. So these are some of the prerequisites for person in perfect knowledge. He should not be entangled in these sinful reactions. That means he should work for Krishna. He should not have any dualities. He should be free from dualities. No, I like South Indian food. I don't like North Indian food. I like Mauritius more. I don't like India much. These are dualities, not good. Devotee is about dualities. Wherever Krishna takes me, I am happy there. And his mind is engaged within in the service of Krishna. And it's in having all this, it's not that such person is negligent to people outside. No. He still works for the welfare of the whole world, like Srila Prabhupada did. He was peacefully living in Vrindavan, but he left Vrindavan and went to America. For whom? For delivering the people of this world. So this is the characteristics of a liberated person. Now, when will when this self-realized soul is knowing about his nature, is not attached to the material world, is that soul is also aware about the nature of the super soul? Krishna tells that in the subsequent verses. Yes, Saurabh Prabhu, any question?
Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Prabhuji, you also told that there are Krishna tells that there are many souls like this,
Yes.
which are which are working for the welfare of the people and working under karma yoga.
Yeah.
So in which text he says that there are many souls like this?
Krishna tells in 3rd chapter, when he tells about the example of Janak Maharaj, 3.20, I think. He tells that many kings like Janak have, achieved this perfection by practicing karma yoga. It's in the same theme. You see, these are many examples in the past who have attained this karma yoga, who were oblivious to the pleasures of this material world, and then they achieved liberation. So in that context, I was saying there are many people in past, those who have achieved this situation.
Okay.
So yeah, let us continue. Text 26. Bharat Krishna Prabhu, would you like to read?
Those who are free from anger and all material desires, who are self-realized, self-disciplined, and constantly endeavoring for perfection, are assured of liberation in the Supreme in the very near future.
Somebody may ask that how long it will take for such a person to achieve perfection. Krishna is telling in very near future, very soon, that person will attain liberation. Which type of person? One who is free from the dualities of the material world, who is self-realized, and is always endeavoring for perfection. His meditation is always towards the perfection, towards the service of the Supreme Lord. Our acharyas give example of aquatic animals like fish and tortoise. They give example of fish, that when fish gives eggs, fish simply looks at the eggs. When tortoise gives eggs, tortoise also lay eggs on land and meditates on the eggs. So by this meditation, eggs get nourishment. Because always looking toward those eggs, always meditating on those eggs. How it exactly happens, I also don't know. But this is in scriptures. The tortoise looks towards eggs, meditates on it, and eggs get nourishment. Similarly, the devotees in Krishna consciousness, although they are so far from the Lord's abode, but still they are always thinking of Him constantly. And by thinking of the Lord constantly, their devotional service get more and more nourished. They become more and more engaged in Krishna consciousness. And finally, they go back to Krishna. So that is the process, and it happens in all cases. If person is completely dependent on the Supreme Lord and engages in the practical service of the Lord. Now, Lord tells about the process of Ashtanga Yoga, because by the process of Ashtanga Yoga also one can fix his focus on the Supreme Lord. We have to remember that the final stage of Ashtanga Yoga is Samadhi. And that Samadhi means complete focus on the Supreme Lord. So devotee also attains the complete focus on the Supreme Lord, and that is the perfection of Ashtanga Yoga. 27 and 28, Krishna is telling about Ashtanga Yoga. So, Venudhari Prabhu, would you like to read text 27 and 28?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes. Shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the two eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and just controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence, the transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated.
So this is the process of Ashtanga Yoga, where a practitioner, his journey is from external senses to the internal connection of soul with super soul. So it starts with yam, niyam. Yam means to give up unnecessary things. Niyam means to practice the regulations. Asana means physical control of the senses. Pranayam means controlling the life airs. Pratyahar, giving up the bodily needs. Dharana means holding the life air. Dhyana means fixing the attention on the Supreme Lord. Samadhi means completely oblivious of the surroundings and completely fixing on the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. So Prabhupada in purport tells that such focus is simply achieved by devotional service. A devotee in Krishna consciousness who can immediately understand one's spiritual identity. So this whole process of yoga is to bring one to the level of Krishna consciousness. And in other sense, if we see, devotee automatically becomes Krishna conscious. So he need not to go through the difficult part of Ashtanga Yoga, but just by surrendering on the Supreme Lord, remembering him, chanting his name, following the instruction of spiritual master, a person automatically develops his Krishna consciousness. So Krishna tells that such a person will certainly be liberated. So we can't be liberated just by controlling of the senses. No. When Krishna is talking about this Ashtanga Yoga, he's not telling just about controlling of the senses. No. He is telling that by the process of controlling the senses, we become fixed in our knowledge. What is that knowledge? Gyatva is described in the final verse of this chapter. Prabhupada gave this verse name peace formula. Prabhupada also wrote one whole article on it, the peace formula. Kripalu Keshavi Mataji, can you read the quotation from Srila Prabhupada? Please unmute. The quotation is on the screen.
The conditioned source within the clutches of the illusory energy are all anxious to attain peace in the material world. But they do not know the formula for peace, which is explained in the part of the Bhagavad Gita 5:27.
So this is the real peace formula which Krishna is telling in the final verse of this chapter. Very important words. Devotees can remember this verse. Bhoktaram Yagyatapsam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Suridam Sarvabhutanam Gyatva Mam Shantim Richati. Kripalu Keshwavi Mataji, would you like to read the translation?
Yes, Prabhu.
You have the book?
A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries.
So first step is to understand that Krishna is real enjoyer, Bhoktaram. Because we are miserable because of competing with the Supreme Lord. He is the supreme enjoyer and we want to enjoy, and that creates the conflict. So if we becomes the servant of the Supreme Lord, automatically we will enjoy. Like if this very rich person, his servants will suffer, never suffer. They will also live nicely, they will also eat nicely. But if servant starts to compete with the master, then there is problem. So Bhoktaram Yajna Tapsam, first step is to understand that Krishna is the ultimate enjoyer. Second is Sarva Loka Maheshwaram. He is the ultimate controller. Everything is under his control. See, we become stressed because we think that we can change something, or we are capable of doing some big task which we are not doing. But actually, we are not having that power. Krishna is the ultimate controller. If I am getting some difficulties in my life, it's by Krishna's will. If I'm getting some happiness in my life, it is by Krishna sanctioning it. So he is in control. We are controlled. So that is the second step. Sarva Loka Maheshwaram. So after reading these two lines, somebody will become fearful. Oh, what kind of cruel God is Krishna? He's so cruel. He is enjoyer and he is controller. Exploit us? Go with us. No need to fear. Suridam Sarva Bhutanam. Third line. He is the best friend and well-wisher of all living entities. Yes, he is the controller, he is the enjoyer. But his best quality is Bhakta Vatsal. He loves his devotees. Not only devotees, Sarva Bhutana. He is friend and well-wisher of all living entities. So if we understand this, that our friend, our well-wisher, is the ultimate controller. Imagine if your friend is Prime Minister of your country. Will you have any difficulty? Any difficulty, just call your friend. That I am in such and such difficulty, please sort it out. Now imagine one who is controller of the whole universe. That person is your friend. If we understand this point, can there be any misery in our life? No. Therefore, Gyatva Mam Shantim Richati. Even understand Krishna in perfection, Shantim Richati, that person will be completely peaceful. He will not have any anxiety of this world. So that is the conclusion of this chapter, where Krishna tells that you need to know me. And if you know me in perfection and surrender unto me, serve me, that is the real Karma Yoga. That is the real action in Krishna consciousness. And person doing that will never get bound and he will be liberated and go back to Krishna. Let us summarize this by a quotation from Srila Prabhupada. Saurabh Prabhu, would you like to read?
Yes, Prabhuji. What kind of friend? Krishna says, I am Suhridram Sarva Bhutanam. Suhudra. He wants how you shall be happy. Mitra, social friendship. Bandhu, official friendship. But Suhrit means one who actually desires good of his friend. Sincere friends, which you describe in English. So Krishna is Suhrit. He is always expecting my good. How shall I be good? Therefore, he is canvassing me. Please, you surrender unto Hare Krishna.
There are three categories of friend. One is Bandhu. Bandhu means official friend. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. That is bandhu. Second is mitra. Mitra means social friendship. There may be some relation, they may help to some extent, but they have their limitations. But suhrit means ultimate well-wisher, ever well-wisher, as Prabhupada would sign, your ever well-wisher, ever well-wisher. That is Krishna. We become animal, he goes with us in our heart. We become human being, we become proud, we forget him, still he never leaves us. That is Krishna. And if we understand that he is our ultimate friend, he is the ultimate controller, he is the ultimate enjoyer, we'll have no anxiety. We'll be completely in peace and we can be happy in this world and go back to Krishna for eternal bliss in the next life. Hare Krishna. So this summarizes the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. I request devotees to kindly read the purports, and if you have some questions, you can note it down. We can discuss in the next class. And tomorrow at 8:15 Indian time, 6:45 Mauritian time, we'll start 6th chapter. So I'll request devotees to kindly have a look on translations of 6th chapter at least, and you can read the first 20 translations of 6th chapter. So you can just have a brief look on it. So it will be easier tomorrow to study it. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.